Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. Today we're going deep, like really deep, into the mind of Auguste Comte.
Comte.
Hmm.
Where do we even begin with a figure like Comte? I guess we could start with the basics, right?
Yeah.
French philosopher, born in 1798, died in 1857.
Yeah, that's a good starting point, I guess. But, he wasn't just any philosopher. I mean, this is the guy who gave us the terms sociology and altruism. And if that wasn't enough, he also developed this whole intricate system of thought called positivism.
Positivism. Yeah, that's a big one. We'll
Yeah.
definitely have to unpack that. But, there's this quote by Comte that really struck me when I was first digging into his work. It goes, Os mortos governamos vivos.
Wait, say that again. What does that even mean?
It means the dead given the living. Powerful, right?
Wow. Yeah, it's definitely got that ominous ring to it. And it kind of sets the stage for what we're going to be tackling in this deep dive, doesn't it?
It does. Because what we're really going to be exploring is how Comte's ideas, his whole way of thinking, continues to shape our world today.
Exactly. So we'll be going through his life, the twists and turns, his famous law of three states. We'll try to get our heads around this positivism thing he was so passionate about and how he basically invented sociology.
And of course, we can't forget about the impact his ideas had, both the positive and the, well, let's just say not so positive. Because Comte was a controversial figure, no doubt about it.
For sure. So you ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's start with the man himself. His journey wasn't exactly, a straight line.
Yeah, no kidding. He was actually kicked out of the École Polytechnique.
Ooh, scandalous. Why? What happened?
Student protest. Seems he always had a bit of that rebellious spirit in him.
Interesting. So what did he do after that?
Well, he tried his hand at medical studies for a bit, but that didn't really stick. And then things took a turn. From 1817 to 1824, he worked as a secretary for a guy named Henri de Saint-Simon.
Saint-Simon, the socialist thinker. That's quite a pairing.
Yeah, and a pretty crucial period for Comte. This is where he really started developing his intellectual chops. Saint-Simon, despite, well, some of his quirks, he really fostered Comte's early work.
I bet there are some stories there. Saint-Simon wasn't exactly known for his stability. I mean, the guy tried to commit suicide.
Yeah, that's definitely not your typical office environment. And to make things even more complicated, some of Comte's early writing was published under Saint-Simon's name.
Oh no, talk about a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. But the real breaking point was when Saint-Simon tried to pass off part of Comte's course of positive philosophy like it was his own work.
Wow, just wow. That must have stung.
Absolutely. Comte publicly disowned him after that. But, amidst all this drama, Comte was also battling some serious personal demons.
Right, his struggles with depression.
Exactly. In 1826, he was admitted to an asylum.
It's hard to imagine, right? The guy who championed reason and order was grappling with these intense inner struggles. The psychiatrist, Jean-Étienne Dominique Esquirol, diagnosed him with a manic disorder and prescribed, well, some treatments that sound pretty brutal by today's standards. Cold water baths and bloodletting.
It's wild, isn't it? And then, on top of that, he also attempted suicide, jumped off the Pont des Arts.
It makes you realize even the most influential thinkers, the ones who try to systematize the world, they're still human, dealing with the same messy realities as the rest of us.
Absolutely. So with all that as a backdrop, let's try to get into his ideas, starting with one of his most famous, the law of three states. What's the gist of it?
Well, Comte believed that human understanding, both over the course of history and in an individual's life, it passes through these three distinct stages. And he called them, you guessed it, the three states.
Okay, hit me with the first one.
The first one is the theological state. This is where people explain everything through, well, supernatural stuff like gods and spirits. Imagine early humans worshiping a tree or a river.
Right, like attributing power to things they didn't understand. Makes sense. So what's next?
Next comes the metaphysical state. This is where things get a bit more abstract. Instead of gods, you have these vague forces and essences explaining the world. Think of those old philosophers debating the nature of reality.
Okay, so we've gone from spirits and trees to philosophical debates. What's the final stage?
The final, and in Comte's view, the most advanced stage, is the scientific or positive state. Here, we understand things through observation, experiments, the scientific method. We're looking for laws, not gods or mystical forces.
So basically, from superstition to abstraction to evidence-based knowledge, it's like that aha moment you get when you finally understand something complex, right?
Exactly. You go from those vague ideas to finally grasping the underlying principles. And Comte actually compared this societal progression to an individual's development. childhood being the theological stage, full of wonder and magical thinking. Then comes adolescence, the metaphysical phase, all about questioning and abstract ideas. And finally, adulthood, when we supposedly reach that scientific, rational understanding.
Interesting analogy. So Comte saw this as like a natural progression, right? From the simple to the complex.
Absolutely. And he actually took this idea a step further with what he called the encyclopedic law, sometimes referred to as the epistemological law. It's basically a hierarchy of the sciences.
A hierarchy, like some sciences are better than others.
Well, not better, exactly. More like each science builds upon the one before it. At
Yeah.
the bottom, you have mathematics, the most basic, the foundation. Then comes astronomy, then physics, chemistry, biology, and at the very top, the most complex of them all.
Sociology, the study of society itself.
You got it. Comte believed that each science had to develop before the next one could emerge. Like, you need physics before you can have chemistry, and so on.
And his massive course of positive philosophy was basically his attempt to, like, lay out this whole system of knowledge.
Exactly. 6 volumes, covering everything from math to sociology. Talk about ambitious.
That's Comte for you, always
Yeah.
thinking big. So let's get to the heart of it. Positivism and this whole idea of sociology. Why was he so obsessed with creating this new way of thinking, this new science of society?
Well, you got to remember the context. Comte lived through some pretty turbulent times.
Yeah.
The French Revolution had just shaken everything up.
Right. All the old certainties, the monarchy, the church, everything was up for grabs.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And Comte saw positivism as a way to bring some order to the chaos.
Yeah.
He believed that by understanding the laws that govern society, we could create a more stable and just world.
So sociology was like his answer to the big questions of his time. How do societies work? How can we make them better?
Precisely. And he was adamant that sociology had to be a real science based on observation and evidence, not just speculation. He even used this evolutionary metaphor, kind of like Darwin's ideas. Remember, Darwin's theory of evolution was just starting to emerge around this time. So it was all about looking at the data, seeing how societies evolved, and figuring out the underlying patterns.
Fascinating. So Comte saw all of this as an interconnected system. You can't have progress without order. You can't have sociology without positivism. It's all tied together. And his ideas didn't just stay in France, did they? This material mentions Harriet Martineau.
Right. She was a remarkable English social theorist who actually translated and condensed Comte's course into something a little more digestible for English readers.
That must have been quite the undertaking. I mean, we're talking 6 volumes of dense philosophical writing here.
It was no small feat. But Martineau wasn't just a translator. She was a brilliant thinker in her own right. And she actually used Comte's ideas to fuel her own activism. She was a strong advocate against slavery and for women's rights.
So she put positivism into action, so to speak. Used it to fight for social justice.
Exactly. And then you had John Stuart Mill, the big-name English philosopher. He was initially a fan of Comte, but over time, their relationship became a little more complicated.
Oh, what happened there?
Well, Mill wasn't too keen on Comte's later ideas, particularly his attempts to turn positivism into a full-blown religion.
Wait, a religion? Comte wanted to start a religion.
You heard that right. It was called the Religion of Humanity. And let me tell you, it was quite a spectacle. He created a whole new calendar, 13 months, named after influential figures like Archimedes and Dante. Even the days of the week were dedicated to important people.
Wow. He really went all in on this.
He did. And it wasn't just some theoretical concept. They actually established these chapels of humanity, not just in France, but even a few in Brazil.
And speaking of Brazil, have you noticed their national flag?
What about it?
It says Ordem e Progresso.
Right. Order and progress. Wait a minute. Isn't that?
It's Comte's motto, right there on the Brazilian flag. That's some real-world impact for you. That's incredible. And speaking of mottos, at the heart of this whole religion of humanity was the idea of altruism, right?
Absolutely. Comte actually coined the term altruism, which comes from his saying vivre pour autrui, meaning to live for others. This emphasis on selflessness, on putting the needs of others before your own, was absolutely central to his whole ethical system.
This focus on the collective good really shines through in his, let's say, unconventional views on rights and duties.
Oh yeah, he definitely went against the grain there. Comte argued that in a positivist society, there should be no rights, only duties. He saw the whole concept of individual rights as being, well, selfish and detrimental to social harmony.
And he didn't mince words, did he? I mean, he flat out said, any human right is therefore as absurd as it is immoral.
That's Comte for you, always provocative. He believed that we're all born with obligations to our ancestors, to future generations, to everyone around us. And those obligations come before any individual claims. It's all about the greater good, the collective well-being.
And he actually believed that as society progresses towards this positivist ideal, people would naturally come to understand and accept their duties, their place in the grand scheme of things. It's like he envisioned a world where everyone is working together, guided by science and a shared sense of purpose.
Exactly. It's a very utopian vision, isn't it? But some might say it's a bit too idealistic, maybe even a little naive.
Well, let's just say it raises some eyebrows, especially in our individualistic, rights-focused world. And speaking of raising eyebrows, we can't forget about his thoughts on free thought.
Uh-oh. That's where things get a little tricky. He made this rather bold statement. Men are not allowed to think freely about chemistry and biology. Why should they be allowed to think freely about political philosophy?
Wait, hold on. Isn't that a bit contradictory coming from the guy who championed reason and scientific inquiry?
It seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I think what he was getting at was that certain areas of knowledge, especially when it comes to how societies should be organized, well, those should be guided by science, by the principles of positivism. It's like he was saying there's a right way to think about these things, and that's the positive way.
So individual opinion doesn't really have a place in this system. It's all about following the dictates of science as interpreted by, well, Comte himself.
It's certainly open to that interpretation, and it definitely raises some red flags about the potential for authoritarianism in his thinking.
No doubt about it. So on the one hand, he's advocating for reason and scientific progress, but on the other hand, he seems to be saying, don't question the system.
Yeah, it's a bit of a paradox. But to be fair to Comte, I think he genuinely believed that positivism would lead to a better world, a world where everyone would ultimately benefit.
Okay, so maybe he was a bit of a control freak, but with good intentions. Or maybe a dreamer who got a little carried away with his own ideas.
It's probably a bit of both. But, one thing that's often overlooked is his emphasis on the importance of emotions.
Really? I always thought of Comte as being all about cold, hard logic.
Well, he actually said, the intellect must always be the servant of the heart and must never be its slave.
Wow. That's not what I expected.
He believed that emotions, feelings, they're crucial for achieving unity, both within individuals and across society. He wasn't advocating for a world ruled by robots. He understood that humans are driven by more than just logic.
So it's not just about cold, calculating reason, but also about shared feelings, compassion, a sense of belonging.
Exactly. And he believed that this emotional connection was essential for guiding our intellectual pursuits towards, well, the common good.
It's an interesting balance, isn't it? Science and sentiment working together.
Absolutely. And speaking of balance, Comte was a big believer in finding common ground. He wanted philosophers and the working class to team up, to use their combined knowledge and experience to shape public opinion and drive progress.
It's kind of like he saw them as representing the two essential elements of a healthy society, the thinkers and the doers.
Precisely. And while he recognized the good intentions of some other ideologies, like communism, with its focus on social justice and equality, he believed positivism offered a better path forward, one grounded in science and reason.
So not a fan of revolution then, more like evolution.
Exactly. Gradual progress, guided by knowledge and a shared commitment to the well-being of all.
Yeah.
And in this vision of a future society, women played a particularly significant role.
Really? In what way?
He saw women as the moral compass of society. He believed they had a unique capacity for compassion and empathy, and that they were essential for reminding everyone of the importance of feelings over pure reason and ambition.
Interesting. So not exactly a feminist, but he definitely recognized the importance of women in shaping a more humane and ethical world.
Exactly. And he wasn't just theorizing about this ideal future. He actually had some very specific ideas about how to make it happen. For example, he proposed a universal monetary system based on, wait for it, spheres made of gold, silver, and platinum.
Spheres? Really?
Yeah, I know, it sounds strange, but he had this whole elaborate scheme where the spheres would be inscribed with the positivist motto and the image of Charlemagne.
Wow, talk about a detailed vision.
He even specified the exact weights of the spheres. Comte was nothing if not thorough. But his ideas about science, especially mathematics, those were sometimes, well, a little hard to follow.
How so?
He claimed that mathematical analysis is the true rational basis of the whole system of our positive knowledge. Clearly, math was fundamental to his whole way of thinking.
Makes sense. Math is the language of science, after all. But then he also said, every attempt to refer chemical questions to mathematical doctrines must be considered now and always profoundly irrational.
Yeah, that one's a head-scratcher. It seems like he was contradicting himself. But when you look closer at his writings, like his discussion of acoustics, you can see a more nuanced picture. He recognized the power of math for understanding certain phenomena, but he was also wary of applying it prematurely or inappropriately to fields like chemistry, where the underlying principles might not be fully understood yet.
So it's not that he was against using math and other sciences. It's more like he was advocating for caution, for respecting the unique nature of each discipline.
Exactly. He wasn't a fan of forcing a mathematical square peg into a round hole, so to speak.
That makes sense. So it's not surprising that a thinker as bold and often controversial as Comte attracted his share of
Oh,
critics.
for sure. D.H. Huxley, the famous biologist, he jokingly said that Comte's positivism was basically Catholicism minus Christianity.
Meaning it had all the structure and dogma of religion, just without the, well, God part.
Right. And Thomas Maswick, another philosopher, he pointed out the irony of Comte starting out as this anti-religion guy, only to end up creating his own kind of secular religion with the whole religion of humanity thing.
Talk about coming full circle. And even John Stuart Mill, who was initially on board with Comte's ideas, he became a vocal critic, especially of Comte's vision of a scientifically organized society.
Yeah, Mill saw it as a potential recipe for tyranny. He argued that Comte's system was basically aiming to create this all-powerful state that would dictate every aspect of people's lives, not exactly the freedom and individuality that Mill was all about.
Ouch. That's a pretty harsh critique coming from someone who once admired your work.
It is, and it wasn't just philosophers who were skeptical. Scientists like Louis Pasteur, the famous chemist, he wasn't impressed either. He basically dismissed Comte with a snide remark. Of Max Comte, I have only read a few absurd passages.
That's gotta sting. And then there was J.R. Partington, who criticized Comte's ideas about chemistry and astronomy. He pointed out that Comte's theories were often outdated and didn't really match up with the latest scientific discoveries.
And the critiques didn't stop there. Even in the 20th century, thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, were still grappling with Comte's legacy. Sartre argued that the whole cult of humanity idea could easily slide into something much darker, something like fascism.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is. And Leo Tolstoy, the great novelist, he also took issue with Comte's ideas. He questioned this whole notion of humanity as a single organism, arguing that it ignored the complexities of individual consciousness and experience. Tolstoy also criticized how people were cherry-picking Comte's ideas, focusing on the order and progress aspects while ignoring his emphasis on altruism and compassion.
It's amazing how Comte's ideas continue to provoke debate and discussion even today. And it's fascinating to see how different thinkers, coming from different backgrounds and perspectives, have interpreted and critiqued his work. For instance, the way he envisions stages of intellectual development is quite different from someone like Kierkegaard, who focused on existential stages. Comte's endpoint was scientific understanding, while Kierkegaard's was a religious or spiritual awakening.
Absolutely. And Comte's emphasis on a kind of predetermined societal progress, guided by science, contrasts sharply with Kierkegaard's focus on individual choice and the inherent uncertainty of existence.
So where does all this leave us? With a figure as complex and controversial as Comte, it's tough to draw a simple conclusion, but I think it's safe to say he left a mark, a big one.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, this is the guy who gave us the term sociology. He basically invented the scientific study of society.
Right. And even though some of his ideas might seem outdated or even a little scary today, there's no denying that he was asking some really big, important questions. How do societies function? How can we make them more just and equitable? What's the role of science in all of this?
And those are questions we're still grappling with today.
Absolutely. So let's go back to that quote we started with, "The dead govern the living." After this deep dive into Comte's life and thought, what do you make of it now?
It's definitely food for thought, isn't it? I mean, here we are over a century after his death, still wrestling with the ideas he put forth. In a way, he's still shaping how we think about society, about knowledge, about our responsibilities to each other.
It's almost like his ghost is still hovering over us, whispering these big questions in our ears. So to you, the listener, we leave you with this. How do you see the legacy of the past shaping the present? In what ways do those who came before us continue to influence the world we live in today?
And perhaps even more importantly, how can we, those living now, use that legacy, both the good and the bad, to shape a better future? a future that honors the best of what came before, while also paving a new path forward. It's a challenge, for sure, but it's one worth taking on.
Well said. That's all the time we have for today, folks, but we encourage you to keep the conversation going. Read Comte, read his critics, and decide for yourself where you stand on his complex and enduring legacy. Until next time, keep diving deep.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.